A summer of change in Phoenix has already started. After shockingly missing the playoffs this year despite the most expensive roster in NBA history, the Suns have fired Coach Mike Budenholzer after just one season, the third straight season that they have fired their coach. And it's clear that this era of Phoenix Suns basketball is over. They will try to trade Bradley Beal. A Kevin Durant trade seems inevitable at this point, especially considering they almost traded him at the deadline. And despite the Suns' own plans, what exactly would convince Devin Booker to stick around at this point either? This is just a complete disaster of a situation in Phoenix that's likely only going to get worse. Now, Coach Bud is not blameless in the disaster that was the Phoenix Suns this season. Last year, with largely the same roster with Frank Vogel, they were top half of the league defensively, and this year they are one of the worst defenses in the league, and as I said, missed the playoffs. And obviously you can point out the fact that their stars are not healthy. Beal didn't play a bunch. Durant dealt with injury issues, but this year they were only 19-18 when all of Booker, Beal, and Durant played. Ironically, their record was much better when Beal just didn't play at all. But it's clear that even if you disagree with them firing their coach for the third straight season in a row, which is just a crazy thing to do, Coach Bud was not the coach for this team. He didn't connect with the stars at all. You have a star-led team. Obviously, this team is all about Beal, Durant, and Booker, and if the coach doesn't connect with those guys, if they don't feel like they have a great relationship with him, if they don't understand him as a coach, it's unlikely that that system is going to work. Clearly, this is just a dysfunctional situation, though, in Phoenix, and somehow the GM of the team continues to stick around. We talk about how they keep firing coaches, but the GM, James Jones, is still there, as are most of the people that are running basketball in Phoenix. Despite a disaster of a Bradley Beal trade that is so bad that we honestly just don't really ever talk about how bad it was, because they didn't actually give up a ton in exchange for Bradley Beal, but the way that it limited their flexibility and the complete lack of foresight by Phoenix, and not only the Beal trade, but also the Durant trade, and understanding where the league was going from a salary structure, understanding the new CBA, understanding the second apron, and how much they were hamstringing their team by trading not only for Durant, but also for Beal on a no trade clause, yet the GM continues to stick around. That's not the only trade they screwed up. You go back to the DeAndre Ayton Yusuf Nurkic swap, where they not only gave up Tumani Kamara, but they also got back Nurkic, who they ended up having to use a first round pick to dump. It was clear that they were just over the DeAndre Ayton thing. They wanted to move on from him. I'm not trying to tell you that DeAndre Ayton is some kind of great player, but I can tell you that this trade on screen was absolutely terrible for Phoenix. Not to mention the weird deadline deal where they gave up their only future first that they had to trade to get 3 bad first round picks back in exchange, largely we assume so that they could use some of those picks to dump Nurkic and maybe add Jimmy Butler at the deadline, gave them a little bit more flexibility in terms of the ability to send out multiple assets to multiple teams rather than just the one pick, and generally speaks to how poorly they handled the Jimmy Butler situation as well, as a guy that wanted to come to Phoenix, but they didn't realize the whole time that there was no way for them to get him unless Bradley Beal waived his no trade clause, which he just wasn't going to do. They continued to sabotage their own team by trying to bench Yusuf Nurkic and bench Bradley Beal and trying to make these guys unhappy so that Nurkic would want out, which ultimately they traded him so that Beal would want out. And ultimately, the coach continues to get fired for what is just a dysfunctional situation and largely a dysfunctional roster in Phoenix. Now, the Durant trade and a lot of these moves you can certainly put on the new owner in Matt Ishbia. He clearly has pushed the team and the front office to go more all in than they were comfortable with. They didn't want to do the Durant trade in the first place, at least not the way that it was structured, giving up Bridges and Cam Johnson. They end up doing that move. I would have to believe that they would have been maybe a little bit more cautious under the previous ownership group when it came to bringing in Bradley Beal, because notoriously the Suns didn't want to spend before. They wanted to be very conservative with their spending. They certainly wouldn't have had the highest payroll in the league just to win 30-something games, and the Beal trade has a lot to do with that. And so now we're just at the point where the Suns are just blaming who they can blame, trying to scapegoat somebody, and in this case it ends up being Mike Budenholzer. And at this point, now that they're looking for a new coach, what coach would actually sign up to be the head coach of the Phoenix Suns next season? Realistically, what are their options going to be? They've gone through a couple of veteran guys that are, looking for their second chance, and Frank Vogel and Mike Budenholzer, both those guys were gone after a year. It's a pretty sweet gig in terms of showing up for a year's worth of work and getting the whole contract paid out. But in terms of a functional basketball situation, this is not a desirable situation for any coach to jump into, without even accounting for the fact that the roster is likely going to look much different and be completely in flux the entirety of the offseason. They do not have any control over any of their first round picks, until 2032. Think about how far away 2032 is. That's the next time the Suns have access to their own first round pick. They don't have any young players on the roster basically at all that are going to improve other than maybe Ryan Dunn and a couple of other guys, but it's going to be marginal improvement. It's going to be like role player guys. They don't have a real young asset on the roster other than, of course, Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. You can talk about Bradley Beal if you'd like to, but I would argue and have argued on this channel that he's probably one of, if not the worst contract in the entire league, given his no trade clause, because as we saw at the deadline, they probably could have added Jimmy Butler to this team. They probably could have found a structure that made sense for them and for some of these other teams around the league to get Jimmy Butler, but they couldn't do it because they couldn't get Bradley Beal to decline his no trade clause, and it seems like he's very committed to not declining that in the offseason either. He knows at this point that the Suns don't want him there. He knows that it's not working, and he just doesn't care. He doesn't want to move his family. He went from Washington to Phoenix, and he's just chilling on the no trade clause. So it's going to be difficult for them to be able to make that happen because literally he just can say no to any deal. The Durant and Booker situation is going to be obviously one of the main stories of the offseason, though. Durant is just simply not as good of an asset as he was at the time that the Suns traded for him. And I think there's definitely a situation that could arise here where teams wait on the Durant thing because they'd rather have Devin Booker. Now, the Suns have said publicly and privately they are not trading Devin Booker. They are building their team around Devin Booker. And to this point, we've gotten no indication that Booker is going to ask out of the team. But as I said in the intro, it would be very hard to go into a meeting with Devin Booker and explain to him what the plan is for the future of basketball in a way that would convince him that that's a place that he should stay. Obviously, it's a place he's comfortable with. He's been there his whole career. But I don't think it's crazy to think that at some point in the offseason, Devin Booker could realize, hey, this is maybe a situation that I want to move on from, and that teams might look at the Suns situation and realize Booker's the guy that they want, and they might just be in limbo on the Durant thing, the Suns that is. Because as a result of the new CBA, which the Suns completely miscalculated when they traded for Beal and Durant in the first place, it's way harder than ever to trade for a big contract like Kevin Durant, especially for a guy that is aging, for a guy that you're not sure completely elevates your roster in the way that you need someone with that much money on their deal to do. And looking around the league, there's just not a lot of really appealing options in terms of teams that would really like to get Durant. And all of the teams that would like to get Durant would likely want to try and add Devin Booker first. Like if you go through the teams, the Knicks are going to be a team I promise you that people are going to throw out there in the offseason because of some previous interest there, because they're going to work with Kevin Durant's people to try and find him the right place for him to go. The Knicks they don't have the assets, even given that Durant is a less valuable asset than he was when the Suns traded for him. They don't have the assets to make that move. Philly can't do it because of the Paul George thing. The Clippers are semi-interesting depending on how the postseason goes. They could maybe throw some contracts together, but again, limited assets there. The Mavs are interesting because of the Kyrie connection, but then KD shows up to a situation where Kyrie might not play basketball for like another year. He's obviously getting older, and they also don't really have the numbers from a contract perspective to make it work. The Spurs are kind of interesting if Durant just wants to go and play for Greg Popovich and alongside Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox. They have some of the salaries to make it work, and of course the assets. But again, I don't know if that's really the move that you want to make if you're the Spurs, and if you did, you would want to ask for Devin Booker first. The Heat are mildly interesting. Again, limited assets, but in terms of their desperation to add somebody, we know that they were interested in Durant at the deadline. The Thunder, maybe, I mean, that's like the crazy story that everybody kind of wants to happen again, depending on the postseason, but they don't also really have the contracts to make it work, and they probably wouldn't do it anyway, which leaves us with the obvious team, the team that always gets brought up in this situation, the Houston Rockets. They have access to some of the Suns' future first-round picks, courtesy of some of the trades that they've made with the Nets, but again, they would want Devin Booker first, not to mention the fact that Booker, 1, better asset, 2, younger, 3, not as injury-prone, 4, Kevin Durant needs a new contract. He's a 2026 free agent. So anybody that's trading for him this offseason, if he doesn't sign an extension, you're risking losing whatever you gave up for him in a trade for absolutely nothing in a year for a guy that is known for kind of changing his mind on where he does and does not want to be. And the situation for me that would be the biggest disaster cherry on top of the disaster Sunday for Phoenix is they decide, okay, it's time to trade Kevin Durant. They go around the league, they ask all these teams, and every team in the league that they ask says, yeah, we're not super interested in Durant because they're waiting for Booker. And then all of a sudden, they don't have any way to improve their roster, because the way to improve their roster is to trade Durant, get some assets, move some things around, look towards the future. And if they can't do that because everybody's waiting for Booker, then Booker starts to get a little bit unsettled and maybe decides, hey, it is time for me to move on. He's only got a couple of years left of his true prime. He's got a couple of really great opportunities out there in terms of teams that would really, really want him. And I think it's definitely a situation that he could and frankly should explore. Detroit is an interesting team that I've thrown out there on this channel before, but seems unlikely. The Rockets are always going to be team number one in this situation, and depending on how their postseason goes, that is the team to watch. They have plenty of assets, plenty of young guys. I'm sure there's a trade package between them and maybe a third team that would interest Phoenix, that they could make it work between whether it be Booker or Durant, or quite frankly, maybe they want to do both. You never really know. They just have that much flexibility. And as much as I'm sure the Suns feel like they have a chance to turn this around, they fire Coach Bud, maybe they convince KD to stay because they give him a big new extension. Maybe they're able to find a Durant trade and build some things around Booker. The bottom line is, this is an organizational issue. This is not a situation where one thing is going to fix the team. Firing Coach Bud is not going to fix the team. Trading Kevin Durant is not going to fix the team. This is not a one problem solution in Phoenix. It is an organizational issue that really goes back years and decades, but also got way worse when they added Matt Ishbia into the fold. They've been way too aggressive as a front office. They have a lack of understanding of how the second apron works. And frankly, as excited as probably a lot of people are about the possibility of them being this big headline team in the offseason and trading Durant, potentially trading Booker, there is this other outcome here that could get even more scary if teams are willing to wait on Booker. And then all of a sudden, the Suns are even more of a disaster than we really even thought they were in the first place.